the sacrifices of our military personnel. And we all understand that. We recognize that fact. And if you've seen any of the information about parades and all that's taking place tomorrow and you're able to go, I would encourage you to do so. Now, I didn't serve in the military. I wasn't. It was in 1968, 69, I guess, 70. It's 1970 when I turned 18. And I had to fill out the paperwork prior to that, and it was back during the lottery system. Now, back then, a lottery system wasn't necessarily a good thing that most everybody was concerned about. We were concerned about it. It wasn't, you didn't really want to win the lottery because you would get drafted. But, and I just, on a funny note, there was 5 of us guys that were kind of good buddies in high school. And so we put up, and this is before any of us was a Christian, but we kind of put up a $10. Now, in 1969, I guess it was, because that's when we sent the paperwork in. 1969, $10 was like $100 now or more. But we made a $10 bet on who would get, the highest number. Now, the highest number means that, you probably wouldn't go. Now, you could have enlisted, and some of my friends did. I didn't. I was I already signed up for college, and I thought if I go, I go. But one fella, he said, I'll give $20 guaranteeing I get the highest number. He got number 1. So I didn't serve in the military, but I have befriended a large number of veterans, and I've had the privilege to be with many when they've gotten sick. I've been with many, many families that have been there when their soldiers' battle had ended. I've done a lot of Vietnam vet funerals, and I honor and respect our military with everything that's in me. It's 3 a.m. on a cold, wintry day. Patchy snow covers the landscape as loudspeakers overhead blare, telling everyone to get to their places. Surrounded by sandbags, concrete barriers, and roughly 10,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Bagram Air Force Base has flipped a switch and turned from a deployed city in sleep to a sea of green and tan military awaiting further direction. Some just woken from a few moments of sleep, others leaving their duties to attend to more pressing concerns, all focused on the events that were about to unfold. Down the 3-mile main road of this Afghanistan base, standing shoulder to shoulder, men and women in arms, awaiting to pay their respects to a fallen comrade. Soon, the lights of emergency vehicles can be seen slowly making their way up the boulevard. Escorts leading a flatbed trailer to an awaiting C-17 cargo plane on its way back to the United States. On the trailer are 3 caskets draped in U.S. flags, and as the trailer approaches the lines of servicemen lining the streets, each pays their respects by saluting sharply the men and women who have paid the ultimate price. Once the trailer reaches the plane, the formation is dismissed. Thousands of servicemen in the middle of a war zone paying homage and respect the best way they know how. Similar ceremonies are played out in other parts of the world, all to show the love and respect for the sacrifices and dedicated duty of our military. Those servicemen and women that show every day on a daily basis. Memorial Day is about remembering these fallen heroes and honoring their sacrifices on our behalf. We're the benefactors. Every conflict we've ever been involved in has had its share of casualties of both sons and daughters lost, often due to the unusual bravery they displayed in the midst of combat. Every once in a while, during these conflicts, something happens. A soldier does something which is so out of the ordinary that Congress acknowledges that person's efforts by awarding them the Medal of Honor. This award is presented to someone who distinguishes himself by gallantry at the risk of life, above and beyond the call of duty. The deed performed must have been one of self-sacrifice so conspicuous as to clearly distinguish this individual above his comrades and must have been involved in the risk of his own life in saving others. More often than not, these individuals sacrifice themselves for the greater good of others. One such individual was Douglas Monroe. The Medal of Honor winner was awarded to Petty Officer Monroe as a result of his actions on September 27, 1942. Monroe, in charge of a group of 24 Higgins boats, engaged in the evacuation of a battalion of Marines trapped by enemy Japanese forces at Point Cruz, Guadalcanal. After making preliminary plans for the evacuation of nearly 500 beleaguered Marines, Monroe, under constant strafing by enemy machine guns on the island, and at great risk of his life, daringly led 5 of his small craft toward the shore. As he got close to the beach, he signaled the others to land, and then, in order to draw the enemy's fire and protect the heavily loaded boats, he valiantly placed his craft with his 2 small guns as a shield between the beachhead and the Japanese. When the perilous task of evacuation was nearly completed, Monroe was instantly killed by enemy fire, but his crew, 2 of whom were wounded, carried on until the last boat had loaded and cleared the beach. By his outstanding leadership, expert planning, and dauntless devotion to duty, he and his courageous comrades undoubtedly saved the lives of many who otherwise they would have perished. He gallantly gave his life for his country. Another such example, one that's a little bit more familiar to us, is Pat Tillman. Pat Tillman was a professional football player with the Arizona Cardinals who chose to leave that life of luxury behind him and join the United States Army. The June following the 2001 attacks on our country by terrorists, Pat Tillman enlisted and eventually joined the Special Forces and found his way into battle in the Afghanistan countryside. Pat also paid the ultimate price. There are many, many more such stories, but the picture's clear. Many men and women have put their lives in extreme danger for their comrades in arms, and in some cases gave their lives in order that others might live. It seems in every war, in every battle, almost without exception, such heroic actions occur, sometimes from individuals you would least expect. And I have no doubt that each time, in the days and weeks that followed, the recipients of such selfishness were inspired to fight for their wounded or fallen comrades, perhaps with a greater zeal than ever before. In a small Mideastern country, nearly a little over 2,000 years ago, that also happened. A closer look at this hero reveals some strong similarities to the heroes that I just described, but also some significant differences. You see, his name was Jesus. He was the son of Joseph the carpenter. Raised in Nazareth, the Scriptures give us little or nothing to go on about his early life, other than the familiar Christmas story, the visit of the Magi, and the time when he stayed behind at the temple and his parents came to find him. After that, there's just a significant jump ahead in time to his adult life and his ministry among his people, the Jews, and many Gentiles as well. We're going to be in the book of Luke. Some of his disciples began talking about the majestic stonework of the temple and the memorial decorations on the walls. But Jesus said, the time is coming when all these things will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another. Teacher, they asked, when will all this happen? What sign will show us that these things are about to take place? There will be great earthquakes, and there will be famines and plagues in many lands, and there will be terrifying things and great miraculous signs in heaven. But before all this occurs, there will be a time of great persecution. You will be dragged into synagogues and prisons, and you will stand trial before kings and governors because you are my followers. But this will be your opportunity to tell them about me. Really, we would have expected such heroic action from a carpenter, the son of a carpenter. The prophet Isaiah tells us that there was nothing about him physically which would have hinted at the possibility of any heroics. Not like we would like to picture our heroes to be. Like so many heroes of our present day, he too gave of himself. Well, to begin with, Jesus put himself in harm's way, as do the military personnel. He endured pain and suffering for the benefits of others, as do so many in the military. In Isaiah 53, it says this, surely he took our infirmity. Did I miss one of the slides? Apparently I did, so I'll get to that one next. Surely he took our infirmities. This is Isaiah 53, 4 and 5, if you want to follow along in your Bibles. Surely he took our infirmities and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. Now Isaiah goes on, as we have on the screen. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Matthew records in his gospel, not once but twice, that Jesus responded to the pain and suffering he was about to endure with these words, not my will, Father, but yours be done. Just as in the case of Petty Officer Monroe, Jesus willingly endured this pain and suffering on behalf of his people. Paul tells us in Romans 5, no one is willing to die for another person, but for a good man, someone might be willing to die. He's talking about our military. They don't want to die, but they will. And they have. But verse 8 says, but God showed his love to us. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It's at this point, however, where kind of the comparison between Jesus of Nazareth and the men and women in the military, it just doesn't wash out. You can't just put it all together. The men and women of the military put their lives in danger for the sake of their fellow soldiers against other human beings. Very noble, very brave, and we're honoring that today. But the battle Christ waged was against something far more powerful and devastating. The ultimate victory was not simply the taking of some important hilltop or a body of water or even one country over another, but one which secured our very souls. The victory over the power of the devil and of sin in our lives, and ultimately the victory over death, hell, and the grave. In that victory, the sacrifice made by Jesus Christ, like Douglas Monroe and so many others, it inspired those who witnessed it or heard about it. In his first letter, Peter, one of Jesus' lieutenants, if you will, encouraged his readers with the lessons he learned from his commanding officer. But in your hearts, set apart Christ as the Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Later in Peter's letter, he gave words of caution and encouragement as he said this, be self-controlled and alert. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that your brothers throughout the world are undergoing the same sufferings as you. The clearest, most dynamic example of how Christ's life and death and resurrection inspired his people is the fact that this church is not completely full, but is a big crowd here this morning. You see, you're here this morning, and we sang hymns and choruses, and we gave honor to those that deserve honor. We've done all of that because of what Jesus did. We honor our military and we praise God for them. But you understand that we offer up prayers and praise, and we petition God. And we want to encourage one another in the faith. You know why? Because Jesus went to the cross for us. In spite of the wide assortment of issues that have created problems in our country, the fact remains that America still has probably the best well-equipped and trained military in the history of the world. Even though that's being built up, but it's still. The weaponry we have, much of it we even have no clue. Combined with the technology to use it, makes us seem quite invincible. Have you noticed what Kim Jong-un has been saying that he's wanting to meet with our leaders. He's wanting a meeting. He's wanting to take down his approach on nuclear weapons. Why? Why would he do that? Everybody was terrified of him. Not everybody. Not everybody. We need to, you know why our military needs to be strong? All we have to do is look back to 2001. Just the threat of strength puts people in other countries at all. We need to be honest with ourselves and admit that in a world of terrorist attacks where individuals do not hesitate to give their lives for their particular cause or belief, that we will never be totally protected and will never be completely invulnerable. That is infiltration from outside our country, but we also have infiltration within our country. The terror of school shootings from inside our country, even in communities like Noblesville, Indiana, this past just several days ago, a week ago. God bless that teacher that ran to stop the young shooter while he himself was being hit with a hail of bullets, but he tackled and disarmed the perpetrator anyway. He's saying, I'm not a hero. But is he? You better believe he's a hero. He didn't duck under his desk. He saw and he responded quickly and no one died. At least not yet. They don't think anybody's going to. Folks, he is a hero. Today's reading, Jesus explains it this way. Nations will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from the heavens. See, all of this is happening and it's going to continue to happen. These events are happening today, and they will continue. The psalmist seems to answer back to this gloom and doom with the 34th chapter and verse 4. He said, I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Verse 18 said, the Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. You see, Christians, we fight a different type of war beyond just the physical act of combat. Paul reminds us in 2 Corinthians, the world does. He tells us the weapons we fight with are not the weapons in our terminology of military nature. We do not wage war as weapons of this world does. That's what Paul was getting us across in Ephesians. On the contrary, they have divine power to break down strongholds. Divine power. You know, people want strength. People want, and our military wants the might and the power to extinguish an enemy if need be. And there's nothing wrong with that. But whenever you compare our military to the greatest warrior ever, Jesus Christ, they were doing it to protect their friends. And they were having to injure others or kill others to protect their friends and to protect our nation and to give us the freedoms that we have. Jesus Christ went beyond that. He gave us a freedom that doesn't just mean we have the opportunity to live here on this earth. We have the opportunity to live forever with Him. And that's where the separation comes. Later in Ephesians' letter, Paul paints an even more specific and graphic picture of the armor of God. He talks to us about the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shoes of peace. Are these military? This is military. I mean, he's using the Roman things that the Romans were dressed in to describe our spiritual stand. You know, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit. All of this weaponry, our military might wouldn't look at specifically. But the Christian war doesn't use the world's weaponry. It just doesn't use the world's weaponry. It's a spiritual battle. That armor, combined with a life of steady and regular prayer and Bible reading, will indeed protect us from the manifold temptations that come our way, and ultimately preserve us for a life of eternal joy in heaven one day. The story is told of one soldier who lived with that confidence even as he found himself in the heat of battle. During the Korean War, one man was hurt badly on the battlefield of Heartbreak Ridge. His buddies were in a foxhole about 50 yards away when the man was hit by sniper fire in an ambush. As the fire continued, the other men discussed among themselves what to do. But since the sniper fire was too intense, to crawl out and bring back their wounded buddy would most certainly mean death. For a while, no one would move. The men in the foxhole could hear their wounded friend yelling for help. Then one of the men in the foxhole began to look intensely at his own watch. He could not keep his eyes off it. All the others in the foxhole noticed this and began to ask questions, but the soldier with the watch remained silent. All of a sudden, the man with the watch jumped out of the foxhole, crawled over to his wounded buddy. He then grabbed him by the nape of the collar and very slowly made his way back to the foxhole, all the while sniper fire whizzing all around him. Both amazingly made it back to the foxhole without additional injury. After the sniper fire had died down, the man who staved his buddy was asked why he waited so long to crawl after his wounded buddy. To which he responded, "My mom said every day at the exact same time she would be praying for me. And according to my watch, I left the foxhole exactly when she started praying." Give you goosebumps? It does me. True story. Hi, Mrs. York. Do you still love me? You know what you'll remember this message? What just happened? Hopefully you'll remember maybe a little more, but you won't forget that part. Oh, we may not always receive answers to prayers in such a dramatic fashion as that man did. But beloved, God hears our prayers. And Jesus Christ, the chief soldier of all soldiers, He makes intercession for you and I. When we pray to God, Jesus is there. He hears it. It says He makes intercession for us. God's promises us that the ultimate victory in this world is one that has to do with another world, the world of eternity. And through Jesus Christ, we have safe entry. As we go forth, let me encourage you to remember those who have served and made the sacrifice for the freedoms we enjoy today. At the same time, give thanks to God also for Jesus Christ and His willingness to serve, His commitment to our spiritual freedom and our eternal salvation. And then be confident in your daily faith battles, knowing that you are equipped by God to be that fruitful warrior that'll make a difference in the world that you live in and that I live in. The need for a military force will more than likely never disappear as long as we're here. We will need a protectorate from the forces around the globe to guarantee the rights and privileges we can enjoy today. It is through our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and all the host, the police officers, the firemen and women, all of this, that we have this amazing life called the American way of life. But only Christ can grant the freedom from sin that His sacrifice guarantees to those who come to Him by faith. Now, I want all the children to come up. Once a month we do this, and I want to tell you a little story, a military story. One that I doubt that you've ever heard, and I doubt that anybody in the congregation, even though I've been here for a lot of years, has ever heard. Come on up, guys. Any of you that want to come up, you're welcome to come up. I started to say if you're a kid or act like a kid, but I thought, well, I better not do that. We don't have enough room up here. All right. I don't like here. Scoot down. I want to be in the middle. That way I got kids on both sides of me. Hi, Gracie. All right, now you all can snuggle back in here. I want to tell you a story, a true story. One that I did not know until your dad was in the Navy. Very good. I'm going to tell you about another Navy man that his own children didn't know his story. My father, you know what my father's name is?
No.
You'd never guess it. George Washington York. I'm serious. What parent would name their kid middle name Washington?
What?
They named him George Washington York, but my father was in the Navy in World War II. He and my mother got married on a 3-day furlough, and then he was gone for 28 months overseas. None of us, not even my mother, which was my father's wife, knew some of the events that took place in my father's life during the military until he passed away. And at the funeral, the group of 16 military people that came in to honor his sacrifice and his service in the military shared with us some of it in public and quite a bit of it in during the funeral prior to. My father had different positions, but one of them was I think it was called a 50 millimeter gun on a destroyer. Anyway, they were under attack by Japanese forces, and it was even some of the German forces later, but it was Japanese forces at this particular time. Whenever the destroyer that my father was on was riddled. Torpedo hit it, and they thought it was going to go down. It was able to stay afloat. Other military personnel from our country came in, but my father, under airplanes diving in and all this, he ended up receiving a Purple Heart for pulling people off of the deck where they'd been wounded, and he ended up getting hit a couple times with shrapnel and all that, and had a lot of problems from that. But we had no idea that my father had gotten a Purple Heart. No, he had never told any of us, not even our mother, his wife that he dearly loved. He never told. He never wanted to talk about it. But we had other men. In fact, we had a couple World War II veterans that was there with the group that came out of Indianapolis to honor our father at the gravesite. But they told us that it was well documented that even though we didn't know it, my father, George Washington York, was a hero in World War II in the Navy. But you know what made him a hero to me more than... We never knew that. Now, my dad didn't get saved till later in life. I was the one that led my father and mother to Jesus. But one thing my dad did all throughout our life, he taught us discipline, and he loved us. And he worked hard. A little tiny farm, and worked in a factory to provide for his family. You know what my dad taught me? Family first. Family first. But you know what I taught him? See, I started preaching in 1974, and in the fall of 1974, in a revival in their hometown area, I had the privilege of leading my dad and mom and my sister and several family members to Jesus. And later on in life, Dad told me, he said, well, I may have taught you to respect and honor people and taught you good work ethic, but he said, Danny, he said, you taught me how to have faith in Jesus. Day and a half before my father went to be with Jesus, I asked him, I said, Daddy, how are you and Jesus doing? And I thought when I walked in there, my wife and I walked in the room, I didn't think I thought he was already gone in the hospital in Indianapolis. And I got up on the bed, and I'm looking right down at him, and I thought he had died. And so I had my hands on his shoulder, and I said, Daddy. About that time, he opened up his eyes, he looked right at me, and he said, get out of my face. And I backed up, and I said, Daddy, you're alive. And he said, yep, I think so. And I said, and we talked to him a little bit there, and I said, well, Daddy, how are you and Jesus doing in your walk with Jesus? He said, we're tight. I'd never heard my 89-year-old dad ever say that before. I said, so everything's clear? He said, yep. And he was able to kind of respond and talk to everybody in the family for another day and a half, and then he went home to be with Jesus. But what my dad, he was a hero that none of his family even knew about. You know what that did to me? You don't have to brag about being a hero. Just live the life. God only knows what any one of you guys and gals, what God may have you do. Thing is, are you willing to do it? Kiddo. Okay, you can go back to your seats and we're all going to go home. How's that? Let's close in prayer. Father God, we thank you for this day.